It's a conference at a crossroads. Prater and the Ballgame discuss all things Pac-12 all week long. It's Pac-12 week on Sports Radio 95.3 FM and 1350 AM. The Ticket.
Welcome back, Idaho Sports Talk. You heard it, Pac-12 week, and taking a little poll here on our Cloverdale Plumbing text line. Boise folk listening, wherever you're listening, who's your favorite Pac-12 football program? We want to read some of those a little at the end of the show today. But Prater, let's hop over to the Fat Guys Fresh Deli Hotline. He truly is one of our favorite guests, and he goes on a million of these shows, always comes on ours. I don't know if there's anybody in the world who knows high school football and recruiting as well as Brandon Huffman, who is the national recruiting editor from 24/7 Sports, and we're pumped to have him on. Huffy, what's going on, man? Thanks again.
Good to be here. Good to be anywhere these days.
All right, man. Appreciate the time, too. JP said you're headed to the airport. Where you flying out? You covering some big event this weekend, Huff, or this week?
Spending a week or a couple of days in Nashville, getting our 24/7 recruiting team together before the season starts for all of us, just kind of recalibrating and getting ready for the fall and, learning more about some of these new conferences that some of us that live in certain footprints have seen their conference decimated.
Yeah.
And now trying to, do some more interaction with some of our future brethren as those conferences are all being run amok.
It's too bad it's in Nashville, though, huh, Prater? I mean, talk about a place where you can't have any fun.
No,
dude.
There's nothing going on in Nashville. Nothing.
I love it. Hey, Huffman, I'll start you off with this. What have you noticed in recruiting and any trends there since the big announcement of USC and UCLA heading to the Big Ten?
I had Micah Van Walis, who's an offensive lineman up in my neck of the woods up here in Seattle. He actually chose USC largely because of their move to the Big Ten. He said it himself that move to the Big Ten really appealed to him. Obviously as an offensive lineman, the Big Ten is being kind of a conference of big guys, the big fellas. And Oregon was his other finalist. And there's some concern. Where's Oregon going to end up? Where are some of the other Pac-12 schools that didn't get invited to the Big Ten end up? But you're already hearing some guys saying, hey, well, I'm really interested in playing in the Big Ten, playing in front of those Big Ten schools. On the flip side, you're also hearing some guys that are like, hey, the allure of playing at an SC or UCLA was playing at home and playing close to home. Now 6 of my games are going to be on the East Coast. That's not the home. That's not the close to home I thought it was going to be. So it's kind of a mixed bag right now. I think it's a lot of just questions of what's going to happen with those 10 schools that didn't get the invite to the Big Ten. Where are they going to end up? So there's really just a lot of uncertainty kind of going on right now. And until there's more clarity, I think a lot of the recruits are kind of just operating for the most part as is.
This is Pac-12 week right here on Idaho Sports Talk, KTIK. We're talking to Brandon Huffman, the national recruiting editor for 24/7 Sports, talking about the Pac-12 and recruiting and how it's impacted over the last year and moving forward. That talent drain we've been hearing about the Pac-12, it's out there in the media, it's out there in Twitter land, but you're the guy living it. Is this Pac-12 talent drain over the last 5+ years, how real, how serious is it of all these great players going east?
I mean, if you watch the Rose Bowl, you saw C.J. Stroud put on a clinic. C.J. Stroud grew up 30 minutes east of the Rose Bowl. If USC had a plan in place when Bryce Young flipped from USC to Alabama, they would have pivoted to C.J. Stroud. Instead, who were the 2 front runners for the Heisman Trophy this year? Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, both from Southern California.
Yeah.
One's playing in the Big Ten, one's playing in the SEC. You look at when watching the national championship game. I mean, Brock Bowers scores a touchdown for Georgia. He's from Northern California. Keely Ringo has the pick 6 to ice the game for Georgia. He's from Seattle originally by way of 2 years in Arizona. You had Cam Latu, who scored 2 touchdowns in that game from Utah. You had Bryce Young, who threw 2 touchdowns in that game from California. So, and that doesn't even take into account that Michigan, that was playing in the college football playoffs, they're starting quarterbacks from Reno. So you look at the playoffs, and you look at these schools that are up there, and they are littered with rosters full of West Coast guys. And it's become very real. It's almost like it's more of a shock when a kid chooses to stay in the Pac-12 footprint than he leaves. I mean, just even look at the 2023 class. At one point, the number 1 player in Northern California the number one player in Oregon, and the number one player in Washington all committed to the University of Miami. So Mario Cristobal leaves the West Coast, goes back to his hometown, and he still ends up getting his three biggest recruits to come from Northern California or the Northwest. So you're seeing that drain still happen, and I don't think that faucet's going to be turned off anytime soon.
That leads me to my next question, Brandon Huffman, National Recruiting Editor for 247 Sports. Let's connect the dots here. It's been a problem in the past. It might be less of a problem because the USC-UCLA angle might keep a lot of these kids home. How do you visualize Pac-12 recruiting and their national relevance in, say, 3 to 5 years?
It's going to be all dependent on what kind of programs that Oregon and Washington can sustain over the next 3 to 5 years, because those are the two schools that have done the best job recruiting Southern California from the Pac-12, better than SC and UCLA have at times. You also need to see what's going to happen with Arizona State. I have long been of the belief that if Arizona State had a competent coach and competent coaching staff with good recruiters, there's no reason to think that they couldn't be a top 15, top 20 team annually. There's a lot of talent in Arizona. They just never want to stay home. I also think you look at a guy like Kyle Whittingham, and if he could stay at Utah for another 5 to 7 years with the way they recruit, that's going to help. But Oregon and Washington, so much expectation is going to be placed on them to maintain success on the field, but then also to maintain success in recruiting and provide that alternative to the Southern California kids that still want to play in the Pac-12, but maybe don't have the academic chops to go to a Stanford or a Cal. So they go to Oregon or Washington, two teams that have played in the college football playoff. The only Pac-12 schools that have been in the college football playoff.
Yep.
Two teams that have been in a multitude of New Year's Six games. So a lot of this is really going to depend on what Oregon and Washington can do over the next 3 to 5 years to give the Pac-12 any kind of hope that there is hope for the long-term future.
Brandon Huffman with us, a national recruiting editor, 24/7 Sports. And I guess I'll go a UCLA kind of question your way. How do you think certainly this is going to impact them moving forward? Are you seeing any trends that maybe now UCLA is getting a bigger bite of the apple from some kids because they do have that Big Ten future, or maybe is it flip-flop, vice versa, where they're not? What do you make of UCLA in this whole thing?
Unless Chip Kelly absolutely changes his entire philosophy, which is recruit the high schools very little, recruit the transfer portal very heavily, I don't see UCLA getting any real return on the recruiting side of it for the next couple of years. Now, maybe Chip Kelly's not the coach when they start Big Ten play in 2024, but you would have thought with the announcement coming on June 30th that the Big Ten is going to get UCLA in 2024, you would have thought we would see a ton of offers going out to 2024 recruits. I think they've offered 2 since the end of June. They've offered 1 additional high schooler since the end of June, and it's like their philosophy continues to be, let's recruit the portal. I actually did a story a couple of weeks ago. Only Northwestern, of all the Big Ten schools, only Northwestern has offered as few 2023 prospects and as few 2024 prospects as UCLA has. So you would have thought with the momentum, with the name recognition UCLA had, moving to the Big Ten, there would have been more activity. But no, Chip Kelly is adamant, hey, let's recruit the portal. So unless that changes, I don't think UCLA is going to get any real bump until his philosophy changes.
Brandon Huffman, we always ask you recruiting questions, but you're a really smart guy, so let's branch out. The Pac-12, they're at this opportunity where they're at this crossroads, in terms of they're going to be able to decide their future and their relevance here in the next couple of months and see how it plays out. Outside of doing a better job of recruiting, which you've done a beautiful job of laying out, how can the Pac-12 maintain its relevancy, or how can the Pac-12 grow its relevancy during this next 6-month window? Other than going to a CFP obviously would help, but how do you get there?
I think going 0-5 against BYU is a good step to stop doing that.
Yes.
Because if you're a Pac-12 school, you shouldn't be losing to Independence, not named Notre Dame, that quickly. You shouldn't be losing to Mountain West schools. You cannot have Montana go into Husky Stadium and beat Washington. You cannot have Northern Arizona beating Arizona. You cannot have FCS schools beating. It's one thing for the Pac-12 to lose to Mountain West schools. It's another thing for them to lose to FCS schools, and we've seen it a couple of times over the last 6 and 7 years. I think Wazoo's lost twice to Portland State and to Eastern Washington. So that has to change. You need more results like Oregon going to Ohio State, going into the horseshoe and winning. And the Pac-12 last year had some wins that on paper at the time looked good, like UCLA beating LSU, only for it to be the worst LSU team in 10 years and Ed Orgeron getting fired. And then you can't have Michigan destroying Washington. This year, with Utah opening on the road at Florida, Utah's got to win that game for the Pac-12. With this year, Oregon playing Georgia in Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, the defending champs, Dan Lanning against the school he just left. You cannot have a blowout in that game. You cannot have Michigan State come to Seattle and absolutely destroy Washington. You have got to have the Pac-12 either be competitive or win these games instead of lose these games, because that's what the perception is nationally. Hey, there's so many people. I mean, we see this viral clip every year. Remember when USC came out crawling and hooting and hollering against Alabama, only to lose 53-6 or whatever it was, 56-3. Now, granted, SC ended up winning the Rose Bowl that same season, and Alabama lost in the national championship game with the second left. But people still remember the last time the Pac-12 was on a big stage like that, it was Alabama destroying a USC. So the Pac-12 has to win these big-time national games, have those teams do well, and not get crushed in the games that they maybe are overmatched, and stop losing to FCS schools.
Brandon Huffman, National Recruiting Editor, 24/7 Sports here on Prater and the Ballgame. Pac-12 week. What's going on in Corvallis? You've been very complimentary. Even back when I was on my show in Oregon, used to come on, Huff, and we talk about the Beavers and what Jonathan Smith was trying to build there. Here we are a few years in. Obviously, Boise State goes there in about 2.5 weeks, almost 3 weeks, I guess. What do you make of what Oregon State's done? Jonathan Smith there and the Beavers, Huff.
Slowly but surely, he's been building that program to what he envisioned. It started in 2020 when they beat Oregon during the pandemic year, where they beat Oregon, an Oregon team that ultimately won the Pac-12 championship game. Last year, they got to a bowl. Sure, they lost to Utah State, but it's baby steps. And that was what that project was going to entail. You were going to have baby steps and patience after the program he inherited, but you're seeing it slowly but surely. And I think one of the biggest testaments to that is if you look at the first two recruiting classes Jonathan Smith brought in, it was heavy on JUCOs. It was heavy on players from the transfer portal. In 2022, the only transfer they actually signed, now they had a couple portal guys, but in their recruiting class, it was all high school save one junior college player. That tells you that they've now gotten to the point where some of that young depth they got early on, that's playable depth, guys that are now in a position to start, but that allows you to bring in young guys again to kind of backfill there. And I think that that's the one step that you're seeing with Oregon State from a recruiting standpoint. They're winning some battles. They maybe aren't necessarily getting all the elite recruits, but now they're not beating Utah State and Colorado State and Fresno State for recruits. Now they're beating other Pac-12 schools for recruits. They just went last week, got a commitment from Xander Esty out of Northern California, a kid who had major ties to the Cal program, a Northern California kid. And Jim Mahalchik and Jonathan Smith pulled him in. Dorian Thomas, a top 10 player in the state of Washington. They did a great job recruiting the state of Washington the last couple of years. And I like when Jonathan Smith, you don't see a lot of turnover at Oregon State. When he's lost coaches, a lot of them have gone to the NFL, like a Michael Petrie. But I think the continuity of that staff with guys like a Trent Bray, I think promoting Trent Bray from the interim DC to the permanent DC, a guy who played for Oregon State, he had the blood, sweat, and tears, just like Jonathan Smith. Those are guys that aren't looking to leave. Those are guys that are looking to build this thing for the long term. And I think you're starting to finally see that come to fruition these last couple of years.
Brandon Huffman, great job today in breaking the biggest news, college football news period out of the state of Idaho. You, about 3 hours ago, reported that Kenyon Sadiq, the athlete out of Skyline High School in Idaho Falls, is headed to the Oregon Ducks. We've been following this guy, an amazing athlete, connected with Shane Williams Rhodes, who's doing some work with him here in Boise. What do you like about Kenyon Sadiq? Is he a difference maker for the Ducks?
Oh, he is. He's a guy they're going to bring in as a tight end. I don't know if he's necessarily going to be the guy who's lining up right next to a tackle and playing off his hip. He's going to be a guy that they're going to flex out. They're going to use him as a matchup problem against linebackers, against nickels, against safeties that are going to try to defend him. He's 6'3", 215 pounds. He runs an 11-1. He can run. He can move. He's explosive. He's got a tremendous catch radius. He scored, I think, 22 touchdowns last year. Also plays defense. He's just a football player. and a guy that I think when you look at him, you could see why he ended up with 25-plus offers. That's now 2 years in a row that the state of Idaho has had a elite national recruit, and there's a third one coming up next year in Gatlin Bear, who just actually made the move to Burley, Idaho, from Kimberly. But when you look at Kenyon Sadiq, you look at a guy that if you would have told me he was from the Bay Area or Los Angeles, I wouldn't have batted an eye. I would have thought the exact same thing. He looks like a ball player. I've said for a long time that I would love to see him be like an outside backer, a really athletic outside backer. But offense is where his heart's at, and I think that Oregon's going to end up finding a way to utilize him in that passing game, where I think he's going to be an absolute weapon for them. Iowa State, Michigan, Oregon, or Washington all thought that they were going to be in the mix to get him. He pulls off a complete stunner, but I love that pickup for the Ducks.
I love it. Brandon Huffman, safe travels to Nashville. Everything you're doing at 24/7 Sports, it's the best. If you guys love high school recruiting and college football and you don't follow Brandon Huffman on social media, you absolutely should. Brandon, Avery Strong, as always, and appreciate your time.
Thanks, fellas. Avery Strong, appreciate you guys.
Always. Brandon Huffman. So, a little nugget in that, Prater. The Bear kid, he's moving from point A to Burley?
Well, that's what he said,
Yeah.
and we'll confirm that. But I can tell you this. You know who the Burley High School football coach is now?
Lloyd Christmas?
Cameron Anderson, last year at Gooding High School, who put a tight end with the Michigan Wolverines.
So he gets this kid now.
Cam Anderson put Colston Loveland.
Yes.
Got him Muscali out of Gooding, Idaho for Michigan Wolverines.
Yes.
And then Cam Anderson, who's been on the show a couple of times talking about that experience, turned that into himself into a nice little job over in Burley. So maybe he went out and got himself the next best Idaho recruit. I may have to go lob a little phone call to Cameron Anderson to see what kind of shenanigans he's pulling out.
Yeah,
no, it's not shenanigans. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
He found the best guy. If the best player in the state of Idaho is playing at Kimberly High School, let's figure out a way to get him somewhere else.
I'm with you 100% on that. You want to play against better competition, no question. JP, we're going to have Khalil Shakir talking about his NFL debut. I'm getting crushed on Twitter, and I really don't think I did anything wrong.
No, you did wrong. You
guys.
did something very, very, very wrong. You are getting crushed, and we are going to talk about this because it's just unacceptable, and it's inexcusable, and it's fixable, ball game. We're here to fix you.
And I have a present for Prater. If you remember the conversation about that Pete Rose picture in his garage, well, I think we have our replacement. Yes, let's get physical when we come back on Idaho Sports Talk. Prater in the ball game.
You're listening to Idaho Sports Talk.